18 years ago today, the Marlins traded superstar Miguel Cabrera to the Detroit Tigers in what's going to go down as one of the most infamous trades in franchise history.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Marlins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Jeremiah Geiger. I'm a diehard Marlins fan, and I've podcasted about the team for the last 4 seasons. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel or follow wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. And on today's show, LMF joins me to talk about the Miguel Cabrera trade. It's the 18-year anniversary, a whole childhood from birth to adulthood. It's been a long time. We're going to talk about the fallout of that trade. Also, the Marlins were interested in Cedric Mullins, who signed with the Tampa Bay Rays. But I want to dive into the thought process that the Marlins were thinking there in potentially acquiring Cedric Mullins, an outfielder. Lot to dig into. First off, LMF, welcome into the show.
Happy December, Jeremiah. I hope you're enjoying the off season as much as I am. And a lot going on in baseball right now.
Yeah,
really.
Not so much for the Marlins, but hopefully that ramps up next week with the winter meetings starting Monday. So just a few more days away from what I'm hoping will be an eventful time for Peter Bendix in the front office. But let's talk about this Miguel Cabrera trade, LMF. So 18 years ago, I was, 5 years old. I'm going to be 24 in a couple months. So 5-6 years old. You, however, you had just seen the World Series championship in 2003. You're coming off of this, thrill of beating the Yankees, winning the World Series a couple years later, though. Miguel Cabrera gets shipped off to the Tigers. What was your reaction and emotion with this deal?
So you're aging me a lot here. Thank you for that. By the way, I am going to be 40 in 2026, so that's exciting, guys. No,
Yeah.
yes, true story. But look, I think back to those times from 2003, the World Championship year when Miguel was a rookie and he came out of nowhere, as did Dontrelle Willis. Say the Miguel Cabrera trade, but Dontrelle Willis was also part of that trade, and together they really were uh, the generation of Marlins who pushed us over the edge that season in 03 to win the championship. Yes, Beckett had a great postseason. AJ Burnett got injured during the regular season. Um, and Mike Lowell came back in the postseason from his health issues, and it all pushed us towards the championship. But it really was the foot of Miguel Dontrelle Willis and the bat of Miguel Cabrera that changed the trajectory of that year and multiple years after. So for us who really got back into baseball, Dontrelle Willis really brought the fans back to the ballpark. It's one of the only players who actually pushed the attendance was his starts. So for 4 years later to trade these guys in that fourth year off season, it was rough. I think the harder trade on me was getting rid of the Beckett, the Mike Lowell, Alex Gonzalez becoming a free agent, signing with the Red Sox a couple years before that, which kind of set this trade up because Hanley Ramirez was just becoming who he was, like he was a rookie and it was a couple years. You're seeing a different team at that point with the longevity guys at the time, the veterans, if you will, of this team being Miguel Cabrera and Dontrelle Willis. So when they got dealt, it wasn't as much as a gut punch for me as it was the Red Sox trade a couple years prior, or even a year prior. I think it was 2 years, but I'm really going back there. It was either 2 years or 1 year prior that really set the stage for this to happen. And you would have hoped that the influx of the new talent, it was a 6-for-2 trade. So you would have hoped at least one or two of those incoming players like Maben and Andrew Miller, who became an amazing reliever, would have panned out to help this franchise win. Look, at the end of the day, I'll say this. The Detroit Tigers, for what Miguel Cabrera was, they didn't win a World Series. It didn't push them to win a championship. And the Marlins haven't won a World Series since that trade. So maybe both teams failed.
I
Just
find
kidding.
it I find it interesting though, because if you look back to that 1997 World Series championship winning team, they immediately broke it apart. And I believe it was Wayne Huizenga who was the owner of the
Heisinger.
97 team. Yeah, Huizenga. And then 2003 or 2002, rather, Loria buys the team. They go on to win the World Series a year later. And maybe the fan base said, okay, we've won a second World Series kind of out of nowhere as the wild card team. Maybe this is something where we can have sustained success, something that's different from that 1997 World team. And I don't know if that was the perception at that time because it quickly got evaporated.
From experiencing the sell-off of 97, 98 after the World Series win, we never got to see that team come back. We never got to see
Right.
that team compete again. And then every year after, we went through three owners within, I think it was 3 or 4 seasons. Of course, John Henry being the middle between Jeffrey Loria and Wayne Huizenga, may he rest in peace. For what it was, it was a resurgence of fans coming to the ballpark behind, again, Dontrelle Willis's leg kick for the most part in '03. And really, you got to see that World Series team together for the bulk of a few seasons. Yeah, you missed the Pudge, who really was the battery of the team and kept that team into what it was in '03. Helped us, of course, in the championship, being the backstop. But really, that team stayed together and they competed in '05. I think '04 or '05, after they almost made the wild card. Almost. We weren't beating the Braves at the time for the division. Like, that wasn't happening. But thinking back to the difference of the teams, we did get to celebrate with the players for a few seasons after the one trade, or the second World Series, I should say. But overall, it was really, were they going to sign players? Were they not? The team still didn't have a stadium. So they weren't going to invest the money. There was no stadium deal at the time. They weren't going to invest the money in the team to keep these players. Back then, $100 million was a huge salary, right? Not in today's world where
Right.
everybody gets $100 million. Kyle Stowers asking for one after 3 months, but back then that was a lot of money. So they weren't going to sign either Dontrelle, and Dontrelle took a step back too, right? He had the 21, or I think it was 20 or 21 win season where he should have won the Cy Young. But then he stopped with the leg kick, and he was never the same once he changed up his pitching motion. Um, and then you had Miguel, who was really partying too much. He was almost out of shape. I say that, I think he hit 320 the year in 2006 before the trade, but he was out of shape at I think he was playing third base at the time, coming in from the outfield. He wasn't the little scrawny little home run hitter we had in '03. But it was a game changer. Of course, you lose. You didn't know what he was going to be, right? You didn't know which direction he was going. He was, and again, back then, 320. Today would be great, right? That's Luis Arise winning the batting title. But back then, 300, 310, 320 was good players. That was a good average, not an outstanding average like it is today. But back then, it was rough, right? And I was still younger. I was 21 when they traded him, so maybe I didn't understand still the economics of the game, whereas I do now and understand it a little bit better. We didn't have social media like we do now back then, so it wasn't everyone and their mom talking about it, right? There was no LMF. There was no Locked On podcast back then. There was ESPN. So it really was just everything focused. Maybe the MLB network may have just started, but the way media was presented to us back then was a lot different. So we didn't get the opportunity to come together as a group and vent like we do now. Just a different
That's a
time.
good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even consider that, but I mean, there wasn't a Twitter back then. There wasn't a analytical side to the game, really. If you think about it, there wasn't Baseball Savant and people saying, well, what are the Marlins doing? It was, you make a trade and people perceive it as, that they don't want to pay him and they're going in a different direction. And it would probably get a lot more attention these days, probably a lot more negative attention, depending on which way you looked at it. From the Marlins perspective. But coming up next, we're going to take a look at the fallout from that Cabrera trade, the legacy of that Miguel Cabrera trade. That's coming up right after this. Guys, first off, this episode is brought to you by our friends over at Gametime. Wrong graphic there. NFL season is here. Honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle, and that's why I use Gametime. It's the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Gametime's fast, it's easy, it's backed by the Gametime guarantee, which means you'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. And here's my favorite part of using Gametime from my experience. It's the all-in pricing. There's no hidden fees when you go to checkout. The price you see when you find that ticket you like is the price you're going to pay. They're not going to try to sneak in $20 extra and suddenly you're saying, I thought this ticket was $90, now it's $130 or something like that. So pull up Gametime in just a couple of taps. You'll see amazing deals. NFL games as low as $100. They have zone deals. You pick the section, Gametime picks the seats, and you save big. So download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. Thank you for making Locked On Marlins the first listen of the day. And thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network out there. I'm here with LMF. We're talking about the anniversary of the Miguel Cabrera trade. And in this segment, I want to dive into the legacy, the fallout from this Cabrera trade. Because, when I first started getting into baseball, I was about 11, 12 years old. I had always watched football. That was my first love. I was a big football fan, but I started getting into baseball around 4th or 5th grade. And I start watching, teams like the Red Sox, the Dodgers, the Tigers. Didn't know a ton of players, but I started collecting baseball cards. And I was like, oh, this Miguel Cabrera guy is really good. And little did I know he had won a World Series, been part of the Marlins core, but I had always known him as a Detroit Tiger. That big guy who's kind of out of shape, but the dude could hit. I mean, he was one of the best hitters I've ever seen in my generation of baseball. However, his legacy is completely set in stone. He's a bona fide Hall of Famer, one of the best to do it. The Marlins' return from that trade, though, completely busted. And what I mean by that is, did they make the major leagues? Did Cameron Maybin, did Andrew Miller make the major leagues? Yes. But the return they got for Cabrera, it's like trading, $100 bill for a few quarters or something. It just wasn't worth it. And I know Cameron Maybin played a few years as a Marlin, actually a couple of stints. Andrew Miller went on to have a successful career with other teams. I mean, notably the Guardians, the Yankees, but he wasn't known as a Marlin, and none of those players are going to go down in history like Cabrera was. And I just think this is an infamous trade that is just indicative of ownership and the legacy as it stands right now of Marlins baseball not committing to franchise players.
It will always be known as one of the most lopsided trades in Major League Baseball. When any big trade happens in major leagues now, you go back to one side wins, one side loses, but was it as bad as the Miguel Cabrera trade? And it's sad that even in the trade and the history of where Miguel went and will be a Hall of Famer, Dontrelle gets forgotten here. The Dontrelle World Series kind of gets
Right.
forgotten. When you talk Detroit, you don't go, "Oh, Dontrelle Willis was a great Detroit Tiger pitcher." No, he was a great Marlins pitcher. We will always remember that. They don't. And at the same, like you said, Cabrera doesn't go down as, "Oh, he was an all-time great Marlin." No, he won the Triple Crown as a Detroit Tiger. He won batting awards as a Detroit Tiger. He was the best player in baseball as a Detroit Tiger. Now, crossing over to, from the Marlins portion of it, we got back six players. And I'm going to name them off to you. Andrew Miller, Cameron Maben, the most infamous Marlin, the one who I still feel is the most popular of this whole trade, was Bert Badenhop, the Hopper. He will always go down as one of my favorite relievers as a Marlin, and he will be remembered as a Marlins reliever. Thinking with the Tampa after, doesn't matter. It's got this catcher named Rabello, who was a Pirates third base coach, and other pitchers named Dallas Turan and Frankie Dela Cruz, who probably didn't make it to the majors, and if they did as a reliever on a different team. In a 6-for-2 trade, one of your guys has to hit. It is one of the most lopsided trades, and we're all playing here Monday morning quarterback, right? No one knew at the time when Andrew Miller and Cameron Maben were some of the top prospects in the game at the time, that neither of them would pan out. As you said, went on to have great careers. Andrew Miller became a great reliever. Cameron Maben, a longevity guy. He was on multiple teams. He'll never be remembered as just for one team, and he will probably not be remembered as having two stints with the Marlins. Don't forget, he came back to us as we were the Miami Marlins when we needed to fill the roster with some veteran leadership. But overall, it will always go down in the history of Major League Baseball as an almost Babe Ruth like trade from the Red Sox to the Yankees, where they gave up so much for so little. Even though I hate to say so little, I'm not trying to be offensive to Maben or Miller and downplay where their careers went from, but from a strictly Marlins standpoint, it set the franchises up on two different trajectories.
And that's what you think of when you think of the names Andrew Miller and Cameron Maben. To a Marlins fan, you immediately think of that Miguel Cabrera trade. That's really what they go down in history is from our perspective. If you ask a Yankees fan, yeah, Andrew Miller pitched for us a few years back. He was a really good reliever. Well, yeah, but you don't understand exactly the backstory behind it. And that's kind of what I like about baseball too, is it's a national game, and each fan base is so dedicated to their team. They're so locked into their team that every single trade deal is going to affect the fan base in a completely different way. And I know this is a little bit unrelated, but let's bring up the Brewers, for example, on the topic of trades. If I go to a Brewers fan in Milwaukee and I say, "Hey guys, you remember Lewis Brinson?" The average Brewers fan is going to say, "No, who's that?" The average Brewers fan. To a Marlins fan, you say Lewis Brinson, bust. Someone that you gave up Christian Yelich for. He was supposed to be a new hope, a new face of the franchise, and it just didn't work out. And it reminds me of this comment I got from Adam over on Twitter at CrazyFanForLife, because I retweeted Just Baseball Media's anniversary post of the Miguel Cabrera trade, and he replied to that post and said, "Toughest day for me as a Marlins fan. This is what I learned being a Marlins fan really is." And I think that moment is true for a lot of people. One of the toughest eras for me, being a Marlins fan, was the breaking apart of that core, of the Stanton, Yelich, Ozuna core. You know, you had the Cabrera and Willis team, which actually won the World Series. They actually became champions. People forget, as great as that outfield was, they didn't make the playoffs. They never hit 80 wins. but it was just the same old Marlins. And I really hope that this narrative changes. And I think we're on the right trajectory, LMF. I think the Marlins aren't going to be the same old Marlins anymore. With Peter Bendix, the way they've been operating, it feels different. And I maybe that's the optimist in me. Maybe that's just plain old-fashioned hope. But I don't think you're going to see a situation where the Marlins are going to continually rebuild every 3 to 4 years, because that's what they've done for the last 25, 30 years. And I'm tired of that happening. I hope this never has to happen again. That's my sincere hope for this franchise.
I think you and I, and definitely you, definitely me alone, have been very favorable and non-judgmental on Peter Bendix since he took over, giving him a clean slate to see what he can do. And I've said this, and I've said it to you, and maybe I'm still on an island here. But I'd rather be the Rays, make the playoffs, hopefully win one. But you got to get there, right? You got to be consistently competitive. And that's what he brings. And we did not have that from any of our veteran or GM leadership in the past. No matter who was running the Marlins since 2003, let's say, there was never someone who had the experience of running a franchise that made the playoffs competitively over and over again. And yeah, we're going to be ran like the Rays, not the highest of payrolls. And hopefully that changes in 2027 with whatever the CBA looks like. We need a floor, people. But I think that you're right. This team, this way this franchise is being ran now is different than ever. And then you got to, even if you push back from the Miguel Cabrera trade, and maybe we'll put this online later, the family tree that came from it, right? What players did we end up trading the Mabins or the Andrew Millers for? You mentioned the Yelich trade. I'm gonna contradict that with Ozuna. The 2017 Ozuna trade was a big trade for the Marlins, bringing us Sandy and eventually Jazz Chisholm for Zach Gallen. And now Augustin Ramirez. So even with a bad trade from 2007, 10 years later in 2017, maybe that's a different trade that pushes our franchise over the hump when Sandy wins one here next year.
I want to see a championship, man. That's the goal. Like, I understand the Rays way and that model. This is probably a topic for a different episode, because as much as I respect the small market teams that live exclusively on the margins, the Rays and the Brewers have never won a World Series. They've never been in they've been in position to. I mean, the Brewers were the number 1 seed, but we've yet to see this Moneyball tactic work to that championship level. I think there does come a point when you have to supplement your team financially to a degree.
Yep.
And if you don't, then you really have to, if you have a great year, you have to win it all, because there's no guarantee of it happening again. And that's what I ask ownership to do, is understand that Peter Bendix is really good at his job. He's going to get you these guys like Jansen Junk, who's turning into a reliable starter, a viable option, and he came out of nowhere. You know, he makes these trades, getting prospects like Robbie Snelling, who's going to debut next year, and I think he's going to do very well at the major league level. But you also have to open up the wallet. I'm going to continue to say this really forever as a Marlins fan, because I don't think we can allow complacency, knowing that we can do so much more if we have ownership willing to invest in the team. And coming up next, we're going to talk about Cedric Mullins, because Cedric Mullins was a potential investment, so to speak, for the Marlins. He ends up signing with the Tampa Bay Rays. But why did the Miami Marlins want to go after him? We're going to discuss that right after this. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game, you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks, and you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. FanDuel has it all, guys. They have basketball. They have football. Conference championship week in college football is this week. You have Indiana, Ohio State. Ohio State is -4.5. If you like the Buckeyes, you can go hammer that line right now on FanDuel. If you like Indiana to pull off the upset and continue this magical season they're on, go ahead and do that. You also have the Hurricanes, Miami Hurricanes, currently on the outside looking in from the playoff picture. Will they get in? You can go bet that on FanDuel. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head over to FanDuel.com, sign up, play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Shout out to all the everyday listeners who make listening to Locked On Marlins a part of your daily routine. I know, LMF, you're rooting for the Miami Hurricanes to make it into the playoff. I'm honestly surprised they're ranked below Miami or below Notre Dame for some reason. That does not make a lot of sense to me.
It's the biggest travesty in all of sports. It's ridiculous. Head-to-head matchups have to matter. Look, if they had the same record and never played each other, I get it. It's about money. But they played each other. How can you tell me that the Miami Hurricanes, who the score end score of that game, the first game of the season, is not indicative to how the game actually went? We destroyed them in the first half and then took the players out. The reserves gave up the couple touchdowns in the late quarter. But in regards, we won the head-to-head. And if it was vice versa and we were ahead of Notre Dame, they would be saying the same thing. The Miami Hurricanes deserve to be in the CFPB. And if they aren't, and if Duke wins and there's no ACC in there, it's horrible. And as Marco Rubio said, something needs to be done about it.
Yeah. Well, we got to get back to Marlins because you heard LMF's get the Canes in the playoffs rant.
Yes.
Go over and listen to Locked On Hurricanes. But after this one, but you got Cedric Mullins with the Marlins, who was a potential target. Supposedly, it was confirmed that, the Marlins had interest in Cedric Mullins, ends up signing with the Tampa Bay Rays, the interstate rival, so to speak. Interesting that the Marlins were even interested in him, because my initial reaction was, what are we doing? There's no need for Cedric Mullins coming off of a season in which he hit .216. He's on the downward spiral, downward trajectory in his career. He's an aging outfielder now. He's 31 years old, which isn't super old, but you're coming off of a year in which, it was just kind of mid. There was some power there, some speed, but a really low average. Signs a 1-year deal with the Rays, and I believe it was worth $7 million. So affordable for the Marlins, and that might be why they were interested. It just didn't make sense given that Mullins is primarily a center fielder, and you have Jacob Marcy.
Well, it's very apparent that Peter Bendix likes Orioles. In his first year, I think it was his first year, they tried Trey Mancini, who needed a bounce back after his trade to the Astros from the Orioles. You see, the Marlins have made the trade for Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers from the Orioles. And now you have talks about Cedric Mullins. You know me, my American League team is the Baltimore Orioles. I've been a fan favorite of them since I could watch baseball because the Marlins weren't a team yet. Go Cal Ripken, best player ever in baseball. But regardless of my thoughts on that, Mullins should not be a Marlin. I'm happy he signed with the Rays. There was no point in him here. We have too many outfielders, and maybe you need that veteran leadership, which we did not have last year when was it Derek Hill was our veteran of the team. Derek Hill was the veteran of the team, and he did okay for us. But he couldn't even fit on this roster when it came down to it because we just have too many outfielders. And that's not a position of need. I'm reading about all these different moves that they may or may not make. But we definitely need a first baseman or a third baseman and a power bat at bat. And Cedric Mullins, you saw how he played for the Mets He's not the guy who's going to push the envelope, and
No.
I'm happy for him. I hope he does well with the Rays, and I'm happy for the Rays to get him instead of the Marlins.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't think there was any need for him on the roster. The only thing I can think of is the fact that he's an outfielder and the Marlins were interested in him shows that they want to add a bat. I don't think now, I'm not convinced they care what position it's at in regards to either first base or the outfield, because Clayton McCullough is out here saying, well, Griffin Conine is going to get reps at first base. Okay, well, why are you going to do that if you're planning to sign a first baseman? And that honestly worries me a little bit. Also the whole, I guess you could move Conine to first, have him split time with Wagman and sign an outfielder. That doesn't even make sense to me because Conine's never played first base ever. Maybe he did in high school, not at Duke, not summer ball, and not in the minor leagues. It doesn't track.
I'm just hoping they're trying to like brush us off the scent here or push us off the scent, like, oh, they're actually going for it, but we're going to set the fans up. So when we do get it, it's extra exciting. Hopefully they're doing that, and we're not going to see Griffin Conine at first. Not saying he can't. He's a great athlete. We see he could jump pretty high. So for some of those Connor Norby balls that were going over Wagaman's head, maybe Griffin Conine could have brought them down, just as a joke there and there. But hopefully they do not put Griffin Conine anywhere but left field, where he shined, sealed, and delivered last year on defense and on offense.
I think you could put Conine in left or right because he has the best arm out of Marcy Stowers and himself. You also have Heriberto Hernandez, who's another player that I would rather see start over Cedric Mullins. I think Hernandez's upside is higher than Mullins is at this point in his career. If you asked me this 3 years ago, yeah, give me Cedric Mullins. I mean, the guy was really good, but he had a really bad season, and we've seen this sometimes with the Marlins the last couple of off seasons. Oh, we're going to address free agency, and you sign guys coming off career worse years like Tim Anderson and Cal Quantrill, and it doesn't work out because their careers took a downturn. You take a chance on them, and guess what happens? They don't get any better. Like once you're cooked to a degree. I'm not saying Cedric Mullins is cooked, but I don't think he's going to regain the stardom he had from a couple years ago.
If you're going to give a guy another opportunity to make it on the outfield, I would stick with Dane Myers and hope he stays healthy and could project his first half stats or his first couple months stats where he was a 288 player and had a great on base percentage. I'm hoping that they give him the chance over a signing of an outfielder. But those are discussions for another day, right?
Yeah, no, we got a lot to talk about this offseason. We got the winter meetings that start Monday, Rule 5 draft. I plan on doing a Rule 5 episode, breaking down some prospects that maybe the Marlins can go after. So a lot to get into as the offseason rolls around. Just a couple more months LMF before pitchers and catchers report. We got a long offseason, but it's gonna be fun. We'll have you on again.
114 days till opening day. Get your tickets now.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Marlins. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, stay locked on, and let's go fish.